schizophrenia is often correlated with creativity, but it's also correlated with seeing things that aren't there, right? So it makes you wonder, again, speculation, pure speculation, if on the way to that seeing, you're going to find people who actually are seeing things, but they can't control it, and therefore they end up circling the drain and becoming, a mental health problem, which kind of in some ways mimics the issues around UAP. It's sort of like, for many people, a double trauma. You're seeing something which you don't understand, and that's traumatic in and of itself, but nobody will believe you. And so that's traumatic as well. And you get stuck in a feedback zone.
Welcome back. I'm here with Dr. Garry Nolan. Dr. Nolan, welcome.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to this.
I am too. So I'm going to start with a bit of an icebreaker. So I believe this was your very first publication in 1978 on the foraging strategies of carnivorous plants 2. I read that and I was enthralled. I haven't read the article because I couldn't find it, but I didn't look hard enough. So just very briefly, what was that about and what inspired you to write it?
So as a kid, I collected carnivorous plants. I mean, this was circa, I don't know, mid-1970s or so. I'd built my own little greenhouse in the backyard and I was collecting plants. And there was one, I probably had about maybe 50 different species. I'm particularly I still have them. I have a big collection out in my backyard in a greenhouse. There was one species or genera called Drosera that has these sticky tentacles that wrap around the prey and ingest them. They use it to get nitrogen at food source. But on the periphery of all the Drosera leaves are these non-sticky tentacles, and nobody knew what they were. And I happened to be looking close, and I noticed one of them move extremely fast, which had a little gnat stuck to it. It moved really fast. And I thought, wow, why did it do that? What caused that to move? And so I touched a few of them and nothing moved. They didn't do anything. And then I thought, maybe it's sensitive to prey that are trying to crawl out of the trap and pushes them back in. And so I made like a little milk egg mix and touched the outer tentacles and showed that just touching them with the protein mix, that they were sensitive to that. And so, I was just a high school student, but I wrote this paper, submitted it to the journal, and it got accepted. And now everybody knows what these tentacles do. So, it's a minor thing, but it was my first ever scientific publication.
Okay.
But it's by observation. Observe something unusual and then figure out how it operates.
So in other words, the conclusion was it wasn't the motion that attracted the plant. It was protein mixed with.
Correct. You could touch them as many times as you want and it wouldn't move. You could after a while get it to move a little bit, but not like the rapidity with which it would when it was contacted by a protein or some sort of probably amino acids. I don't know. That's what it's sensitive to. So,
okay. Well, that was a fascinating little study when you're probably 16, 17, 18 years old.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the Caudate-putamen. And one of the things that I'm very intrigued by was that you were studying, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, a mix of intelligence officials who were associated with Havana syndrome, some remote viewers, and potentially experiencers, and maybe a mix of some experiencers are also remote viewers. So I imagine there's kind of a mix both there.
Yes.
And you detected scarring on the Caudate-putamen nucleus.
Actually, that wasn't scarring. we misinterpreted what we saw first as scarring that was common amongst the group, the 100 or so people. It was, and at least 50 of them seemed to show this focused area of neural, what we later knew or understood to be neural density. But it wasn't supposed to be there according to the textbooks, or at least it had never been noticed before as something of relevance. And so that was when we started speculating about what it might be involved with. And it was because we had a couple of MRIs of remote viewers, both of whom had it in spades. It came to us. We intuited that at the very least, this was involved in whatever the process was that remote viewers were. It correlated. It's correlation, not causation. But when we looked at what unified the group, it was high performance in any field.
When the United States and China clash, the world will never be the same, especially when forces beyond reality threaten to intervene. What if the United States went to war with the People's Republic of China? How would these rivals fight for supremacy on land, sea, air, and across the stochastic streams of time? What wonder weapons would be unleashed? What horrors would emerge from the irradiated sludge of the South China Sea? What heroes would rise and forever change the course of history? Tread into the deepest and darkest dimensions of the multiverse, gaze through a kaleidoscope of fractured realities, and bear witness to the disturbing visions of World War III from today's greatest minds in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Weird World War, China. Available now from Baen Books at baen.com.
So we thought of it as a signature of intelligence, but something a little bit more than intelligence, intuition, right? Intelligence, there's two kinds of intelligence that you can easily talk about. There's I can give you a problem and you can work out the solution step by step. And then I can give you a problem with insufficient data, but you jump to the conclusion because you can see, even without being able to prove, what the answer should be, even though you can't take all the steps to get there. And that's what we often call intuition or trusting your gut. And this whole idea of intuition and some kind of seeing things at a distance, remote viewing, is a form of intuiting things with sparse data or coming to a conclusion with sparse data. And so then when we looked in the literature, we found one paper from a Japanese group looking at an MRI, functional MRI, of people who were making choices playing chess, a form of Japanese chess.
And Go?
It wasn't Go. I forget the name of it, but it's like chess, but it doesn't have as many pieces. And what they would do is they were following the brain scan of people who were making choices. And the simple first steps, nothing really lit up. But when somebody made an unexpected but brilliant move, this area of the brain lit up in the Caudate-putamen. And even in that paper, they called it intuition. There was a paper from, actually, believe it or not, as far back as 1990, a Harvard psychiatrist who actually is now at UCLA. And I tried to contact him, but he didn't answer. But he speculated, even as far back as then, that the basal ganglia caudate-putamen was actually involved in intuition and was a data processing center that took information from as many contexts as it had wiring to gather and integrated data. And now, even though it wasn't at the time, many people were kind of coming to the same conclusion that this is really, this area of the brain is an action and goal planning area, which abstracts all information from memory, desires, goals, emotions, what it sees in the world, to make internal subconscious plans for just even body movement, but also now for all the other abstract ideas that humans come up with. And so it's one of the nicknames for it is the brain within the brain. And because it has access to basically all visual and sensory systems, because it needs it to make choices to move in the world, just to walk, it makes the perfect place to integrate any kind of, let's say, additional ability that somebody might want to postulate, because you would have to integrate it through that. The information would have to be, somehow imposed on the system and then understood by this area of the brain to be relevant at all. So, if you had to place a psi center anywhere, that would be the place to look.
To advertise on Through a Glass Darkly, email throughaglassdarkly@gmail.com.
Does it have any aspects of antenna-like qualities, like it's receiving signals from elsewhere?
It doesn't have
signals are composed of.
It doesn't have direct. I mean, nothing that anybody's ever been able to see. But we don't even have a full map of the human brain anyway. I mean, we have very coarse geographies of it. The antenna could be the microtubules that Penrose, et cetera, talk about. And they could be the resonant structures that transmit information. And it's not so much the antenna per se, but the processing center that makes sense of it that needs to be understood. Because, these images that people who claim that they get, they're like glyphs. They're entire images provided at once, like a download. And so it's not like a Morse code that comes in that then you build up. It comes as a flash and a vision. This is what people claim. Now, so that means that the information is coming at a much higher bit rate and data rate than just a Morse code modem. And it must be imposed on a sensory system as a whole, which I just find fascinating. I mean, you have two screens in your head. You have the screen of who you see, and then you have the overlay that you can imagine that probably is similar to what you use when you dream, where you have these visuals that are as real as anything else. But then there's the visual overlay that I can look at you and I can see a cat overlaying you if I want. I can visualize that. Interestingly, there are some people who can't do that.
I was about to ask that. Yeah, because there's some people who don't even have an internal voice apparently either.
Yeah. I mean, I have that internal screen. I can see things, just my imaginings. But when I'm thinking ideas, for some reason, I see shapes. You've heard of people who have these, when they see numbers, they have colors or et cetera, or they taste things. I don't see that. But when I'm thinking, these abstract shapes in my head seem to be moving around. And I don't know what it means. It just is. It's just what my brain puts in place of ideas and manipulates them for some reason. Or it could just be, some hallucination that my brain makes up while I'm thinking.
Yeah, I think the way that you classify these, the ancient Romans had actually two terms for it. They grouped cognition into intellectus and intuitus, which is exactly what you were talking about. So when you're looking at these brain scans of the Caudate-putamen, thank you. I always get this wrong. Wrong.
It took me years until I found the right, and there's disagreement as well. So
I'll take your years and trust them. So in terms of looking at the brain scans of some of the victims of Havana syndrome versus the remote viewers, were there any key differences, or was it because they were also high performing? Well, as an example, there was a media report that a lot of the victims of this were classified in the top 10% of their cohorts in terms of performance, which was it's pretty odd that, well, who I suspect is doing that would know that information. That's highly concerning. But, well, I'll just say I don't want you to get into any trouble, but this is the Russians have had this technology since the 1970s. I think it's called V2K. That's who I suspect is doing it. But regardless, what is, are there any differences, or is it the same high performing?
Well, the differences were white matter disease in the people who were Havana. I mean, indiscriminate damage in the brain. You aim a high energy weapon at somebody, and if it goes deep enough, depending on the angle and where, and et cetera, and the waves and the resonance structure inside the cavity of the head, et cetera, different areas will die. And so it's relatively random. Because we saw and noticed this common pattern of neural density that, again, wasn't supposed to be there. There's plenty of neural density in most people's heads, hopefully. Not as many as I wish these days, it seems. It kind of stuck out. And so that was the difference with the remote viewers. And then when we did sort of a statistical analysis where we actually by hand went in and measured the total density in the area by sort of circumscribing the region in 3D and then getting a density read from the MRI, compared to 100 normals, these people were just above and beyond. Right? And then there was like a curve of going up. So there were like, let's call the baseline was 3. And then people started in this group, some were in the 3s, just like others. And then there were some going up to, 5 times more density than normals, than muggles, let's say. And what was fascinating was, because the first thing you do was you start to look at family members to see, is this an environmental effect or genetic? And, we had a couple of people who we had their MRIs from years before. And there had been no change. So it wasn't that this change was somehow induced. You're born with it, or you grow up with it, or what have you. But in the cohort of 20 individuals, we found 2 families where both first the husband and the wife had it, and the children had it. So boom, right out of the bat. I mean, I'm a geneticist. That's what I got my PhD in and my undergrad in. It's like, oh, well, this is genetic. This is a wiring diagram. This is in the DNA. This is, intelligence is in the DNA. I'm sorry. It just is. It's not racist or anything to say that. And so I find that fascinating because we only see the feature in about 1 in 100 to 1 in 200 people, which is the reason.
By the way, Dr. Nolan, you're blowing my mind, because those were literally my next 2 questions.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
About, is there a genetic marker? Is there once people start remote viewing, is there a change in the brain structure? And I think the answer is yes, there's a genetic marker. No, there's.
Yeah, I don't think there is, but we'll get back to that. If I don't get too far afield, ask me. So, but because it's only 1 in 100, and yet we found 2 husband-wives in a cohort of 20, the numbers don't add up, right? It means statistically, you shouldn't have found 2. You shouldn't have found 1 couple, never mind 2. Just, running the numbers. I mean, you will, but it's just a rare event. So it implies that people with the feature are attracted to each other. And that gets into some really interesting territory, because what you're seeing is something you might call, well, inbreeding at one level, but also speciation. Speciation is when a geographic usually difference opens, let's say in a bird population, because they're now on 2 different islands and they're breeding separately. And then later on, they become 2 different species because they can't interbreed as much. And, Darwin studied this process during his in the Galapagos and other places looking at the finches. So what you might be seeing is the beginning of a separation of people who have abilities, who are just smart. I would just say that they're smart, right? And smart people want to marry smart people. So perhaps that's not a surprise. But what was a surprise was how easily it was transferred to the children, meaning that the gene loci which control it are pretty easily transmitted from one generation to the next. And that's interesting. So we then went on in 2 independent studies with a group at Harvard, the laboratory of Maria Modi at Harvard, and she's a specialist in autism and brain morphologies. And we then reanalyzed all of the MRIs we had, as well as collected new MRIs from just blank patients, nobody with any special abilities, except all the patients that we'd collected had had full intelligence and psychiatry exams done on them. 200, 300 patients, 100 normals, 100 autistics, 100 schizophrenics, and then correlated the morphologies of all the brain regions against intelligence. And lo and behold, caudate came out on top. So a fully independent testing of it showed that the caudate is correlated with intelligence. So, that made us feel good that an independent study run by another group showed the same correlation. So we're pretty sure about that. So the next step is to actually, which I am involved with, collect individuals who have claimed abilities and do deep testing of them to see if we can find the genetic marker that correlates. And it's going to be hard and expensive, probably a few $1 million, but I think we'll get it done.
All right, so many more questions. So when you did this study and you looked at folks who are on the autistic spectrum, as well as paranoid schizophrenics, did you find any correlation with this density?
Oh yeah, it was the same thing. What we did find, though, that the autistics, we actually could tell by brain morphology, we could predict, not with highest accuracy, but with decent accuracy, whether a person was autistic versus schizophrenic. And, that in some ways justified the reason for doing the study in the first place. Mm-hmm. We got 3 independent papers out of it in brain imaging journals. But what it also did was give us the necessary baseline against which we could now compare people with claimed abilities. And the reason why autistics and schizophrenics are great bookends for this is that, on the one hand, schizophrenics are often thought of as creatives, right? That, as you move further and further afield from normality, let's say, or I don't mean that in a positive sense, just the average human, off to so-called neurodivergence, schizophrenia is often correlated with creativity, but it's also correlated with seeing things that aren't there, right? So it makes you wonder, again, speculation, pure speculation, if on the way to that seeing, you're going to find people who actually are seeing things, but they can't control it, and therefore they end up circling the drain and becoming, a mental health problem, which kind of in some ways mimics the issues around UAP. It's sort of like, for many people, a double trauma. You're seeing something which you don't understand, and that's traumatic in and of itself, but nobody will believe you. And so that's traumatic as well. And you get stuck in a feedback zone.
And the system is set up so that mental health professionals can't ask the questions that would allow them to gain better understanding. Without going into it, there's a gentleman who spent 40 years working with paranoid schizophrenics in prisons in particular, where they kind of didn't care if you talked to these people and quote unquote indulged them. His name's Jerry Mrzinski. And he's analyzed the statements and patterns that they would see.
Mm-hmm.
Now, granted, it's not scientific. It's
it's anecdotal.
But there are distinct patterns that somebody who's just seeing random hallucinations wouldn't likely report, right? You would have good hallucinations and you would have bad hallucinations.
Mm-hmm.
Like these are persistently negative. But I don't want to go too much into it, but I just encourage you to take a look at them.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. On the other end of the spectrum, literally autistics, that's another kind of high functioning. You have you have the Asperger's syndrome savants, or even slight autistics who have memory or focus abilities that some of us would love to have. And they're part of the collective differences that humanity can bring to bear on a problem. But it's another form of intelligence. And so because we found unique brain morphologies associated with that, it sort of begs the question, are there genetic or environmental stimulations that cause these differences? Now, back to the issue of there's many people who, or many reported incidents of somebody has a brain injury or a life-threatening event. They go flatline, and then they're resurrected, and a part of their brain might be damaged, etc. And then suddenly they wake up and they claim they have abilities. Now, 30 years ago, there wouldn't be an explanation. It would be thought of as magic, intervention by God or something. Today, we can perhaps take a more medical approach to it to say that, well, we now know that the brain can regenerate, at least in a limited way. The neural crest can provide stem cells that can, basically patch areas of the brain. So maybe what you're seeing in some of these individuals is you're seeing a rewiring that takes one area of the brain that normally wasn't talking to another and gives it the ability to chat back and forth. And that's what you're doing, is that you're creating a link. Now, I find these people fascinating. These would be the kind of people that Elon Musk should be looking at with his Neuralink, because, if we can find those wires that when crossed do something more than they did before, or allow the person to do something more than they could before, that might be, a way to hardwire in new kinds of intelligence.
Now, when you're talking about folks who are on the autistic spectrum, are they also highly correlated on neuronal density? Okay.
Yeah. We saw they didn't in and of themselves have it, but when you looked at them, the smarter they were, or at least on the intelligence tests, the caudate also. But it wasn't just the caudate. There were, and this is the reason why we did the whole of brain. The brain's a system. It's not a bunch of individual modules. And so it's not just the size that counts. It's the wiring between, and the white matter and the neural tracts that we also traced as best we could with the resolution that we had. And it was pretty clear that, if you have a bigger data processing center, you need more data inputs, and therefore there'd be more wiring coming in. So maybe that's part of what you were alluding to earlier around the antenna, is that the brain as a whole is a system of systems, and it's not easy to just nail it down to one thing or another.
All right. Now I have a very specific question. So if you don't know, I don't know if you would have specific knowledge of this, but my wife, her father, and we have 4 children. 3 of the 4 children have this gene. It's the ASXL3.
ASXL3. Okay.
And it is autosomal dominant.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what it causes is this syndrome called Bainbridge-Roper, which is a relatively new thing. And it's a little bit like autism, but it's it could be far more debilitating. I only have one daughter who has it. With this gene, generally, because it's supposedly autosomal dominant, I would have never met my wife, because she wouldn't have been leading a functional life, wouldn't have gotten to college.
Mm-hmm.
But her and my children have higher than average IQ. Even the daughter who's impacted by brain binge Roper, she's just not very verbal.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a professor I think at UCLA that's investigating this.
Mm-hmm.
Her name is escaping me, I think. But in your kind of knowledge of genetics,
Mm-hmm.
how can something like that happen?
How can what happen? The mutation?
If a gene is autosomal dominant,
Mm-hmm.
right? How can it suddenly become not autosomal dominant?
Well, I mean, genes always play against the background of other genes, right? They're not isolated. I mean, there are 20,000 genes or so in the human body. I mean, come on, 20,000 anything doesn't explain you or I.
Right.
System. I often use the example of, nest building in birds, the instinct. Where's the gene for it? There is no gene. It's scattered across thousands of genes that have different functions as the embryo is forming, that make this neuron go there, that make that one go there, that somehow in the pattern of the bird's brain, you get the following kind of nest being built, as opposed to another bird that has a wholly different nest. So there's no gene for it. There's a metagene complex idea. So similarly with this particular gene, it probably didn't come out. There's lots of people who have it, but only if they have a particular genetic background, does it become a problem. I mean, I have a mutation that in a gene called MITF that causes me to get melanomas and kidney cancer. I mean, I've had kidney cancer. I've had like 8 melanomas, but it's particularly bad if you have it and you're Irish because you don't have any natural skin defense for tanning. So, so in that genetic background, it's a worse problem to have. So I think that's, there could be an instance where another genetic constituency in your family leads to a genius,
Yeah.
And so it's not being verbal is not a problem. Maybe it gives you more time to be in your head and think about stuff.
Yeah, could be. Now, with all this kind of genetic modification and things like that,
Mm-hmm.
what are your thoughts on CRISPR and where that could lead, the positives and the negatives?
Well, I mean, CRISPR is a powerful tool, obviously. It's a genetic modification tool. People are building better ones. In fact, they're using AI to build better ones that are even more custom designed. I'm shocked at what these large language models are capable of providing. And they're getting, more and more sophisticated in what it is that you can do with them. So, let's sort of fast forward to a desired goal rather than choosing CRISPR or one of its variants as the tool. A desired goal is to be able to change the genetics of all the cells that are relevant for a purpose to be better. So for me, it would be, I'd love to have all the cells in my body replace the MITF gene, a simple thing, right? I wouldn't have that problem anymore. It's being done for people with sickle cell disease already to replace the genes in the stem cells for sickle cell and a number of other diseases. Those are accessible organs. The immune system is more accessible. there are any of a number now. I mean, let's just look at life extension. Here's an interesting thing. You've probably seen the report out of Nature just this week, anti-IL-11, which is a cytokine involved in inflammatory disease, leads to, you delete it or you inhibit that protein's production, and the mice live longer and look incredibly healthy. You can even give an old mouse anti-IL-11, and suddenly that mouse lives like another effectively 20 mouse years. And what's interesting is that gene or that process is circling several other processes that someone by the name of David Sinclair spends a lot of time on. He's a Harvard professor and someone I know and like, around metabolism and mitochondrial function. And so and then there's this other protein called rapamycin, another drug called rapamycin, and tacrolimus, another drug. And all of them are circling this common area of autophagy and mitochondrial function. And what it's telling you is that you have a node of functionality that is involved in regenerative processes in the cell that seem to be transcellular, meaning that, when we're in cancer is 1,000 different diseases because each organ has come up with a way to make itself, and each cancer has found a way to break out of the prison of, restrictions that organ has created for it. And so we don't have like a common drug that works for everything, apart from radiation or something. So when you find a commonality that seems to transcend cell type, you know that you found something fundamental about the physiology. And when you know that you're seeing this same foundational system also in like worms and fruit flies, you know that you've come across an evolutionarily ancient phenomenon that is involved in lifespan. And so I think the excitement that seems to get refreshed every few months with some of these newer findings is that we're going to be able to go in and change some of these systems genetically, or at least pharmacologically. I mean, pharmacologically first, probably, with some combination of drugs, and fix them, or at least give us healthier, longer lives. I mean, nicotinamide riboside is one of them, something that, again, David Sinclair has pushed, as he calls it, the energy that the system needs, and then resveratrol and the things that affect the SER genes, of which there are many, like 6 or 7 in humans. If you affect those at the same time, they all are circling this process. So, I don't think we have the sophistication today to know where to poke. But again, large language models to the rescue. Some of the stuff that I've been reading about lately in how these large language models are deciphering the genome, the codes within codes within codes in the genome that we don't understand. Like, where's the code for the nest building gene? Right. It's distributed, but the large language models have no problem with distributed information. So maybe we'll be able to use those to say where to poke and what the best place would be. And I really expect within the next couple of years for these large language models, once trained appropriately on the raw data, to start to provide those kinds of ideas. I mean, I've been taking nicotinamide riboside for at least, almost 10 years, and N-acetylcysteine before that for like 30 years, right? And I'm 63 years old, right? And so, I don't think I look like my colleagues who haven't taken care of themselves. It might just be that I'm lucky genetically.
You're also Irish.
I'm also Irish, and and so we tend to maybe look a little younger. But anyway, it's, I'm excited about it. Obviously there are downsides. There's plenty of people who do body modification, and there's a whole culture of people who do body modification, trying to make themselves into cyborgs or, things like that. I don't mind what people want to do with their bodies. It's okay. But I'm not interested in something which is irreversible that might be problematic.
Right.
Now,
speaking of large language model, it's a perfect segue into the next topic. Metamaterials. So you've done a study that looked at some of these novel isotopic ratios that are found in UAP materials. Now, the reason I bring up large language models is, aside from nuclear materials where the isotope count matters, right now, as far as I know, there's no real discrete applications for why these isotopic ratios might matter, other than they could have come from another solar system where that ratio is more common. But with large language models, you might have the opportunity to decipher what mix of these different isotopic ratios and molecules and atoms, et cetera, could lead to emergent properties.
Yep, exactly. There's a simple difference in some isotopes of a given element spin, the nuclear spin. Nuclear spin is used in MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, to look at actually the iron in your blood. So when you do functional MRI, you're looking at the iron in the blood, and you're looking at particular isotopes of iron in the blood that have the spin state that is resonant with the energy of an MRI. But you can imagine on the local level, the atom to atom level, that spin of one atom versus another might so very subtly affect the functionality of a material that you gain something that you didn't have before, which is kind of what you were alluding to. And so there are lots of now generative AI approaches for materials design already, and where they literally will state the goal. Here's the functional space that I want you to create, and the language models will fill it with your desire. And so the more they have access to the what's called quantum chemistry of how these small atoms interact with each other, the more subtle will be the designs that they can enable. Here's for instance, lithium 5 and 6, I think it is. So I don't remember what, but so the natural mix is like 60-40, I think is the number, whatever it is. There's a mix. Lithium is used psychiatrically for people with bipolar disorder. There's something about that lithium that can minimize bipolar. I know this because one of my aunts is bipolar, or was, until she set herself on fire. And so, sadly.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. I didn't even know how to respond.
Yeah, no, it was really sad. But I don't think it was because she was bipolar, but she was. But so somebody thought to try the two different isotopes of lithium in an animal experiment. And why they chose weaning rat pups, I don't know, but they did. So they tried the two isotopes. The natural one, nothing, the natural ratio, the rats weaned their pups just normally. One of the isotopes caused the rat mothers, that's interesting, the rat mothers to ignore the pups, and the other to overwean them or to over pay attention to them, right? And so why? So some subtle difference of how lithium acts in the brain electronically down at whatever level the lithium was interacting was changing the outcome. Now, probably we evolved in a way with the natural lithium ratios to use that as normal, right? And we're not ever expected to come in contact with lithium, hardly at all ever. It's a rare element of other ratios. So that's one. Another one is silicon. You can make qubits with silicon, quantum qubits. one of the silicon isotopes works better than others. Just it holds the qubit state longer before it decoheres. So people are now actually designing enzymatic or chemical processes where they replace an iron in one place versus another, and it just so subtly changes the balance of the electronics between two atoms that you get a better catalyst. So humans are beginning to understand what it would be like to paint the world with a palette of 253 stable isotopes as opposed to 85 elements. We're going from black and white to Technicolor. If you're old enough to know what Technicolor is.
Yeah, no, I am. But the implications behind this, though, are, I'll give you an example. Well, at some point, we will travel beyond our solar system. This has implications for how humans may actually behave on other worlds that, even if they're the same exact elemental composition of the Earth's atmosphere, but have different isotopic ratios, do they behave differently?
Oh, yeah.
Do they, how do you predict that? I mean, that's like a science fiction short story.
There's many.
Baked already.
Yeah, I mean, we don't, I think, appreciate often how intimately connected we are to our ecosystem. And to imagine that we can just disconnect ourselves from all the feedback loops of the world in which we live is ridiculous. I mean, we now know that our gut flora can influence everything from our mood to the outcome of chemotherapy with cancer. If you don't have the right gut, if you transfer somebody else's poop into your intestine, you're more likely to survive the cancer chemo than if you just kept your own. Right? I mean, there are super poops out there that are a good thing.
So, Gary, you're telling me there are super poopers.
There are super poopers, but because they provide so many signals to the gut and through the gut, so you go to another planet and you're not likely necessarily, for instance, to bring along all of the things that are necessary, maybe not just for you, but for the children, right? That if the children grow up in a world where they have a certain expectation of insults, I mean, literally, the moment a child is born, they're assaulted by biodiversity, and the immune system expects that. In fact, it's so much expected, it's almost like a infrastructure on which the immune system must be built because it's expecting to be taught this. And in the absence of that, you get an immune system which is kind of without direction. And it's one of the reasons why people now say the best thing you can do is not keep your child clean, but drag them around the backyard through the mud and, get them to see as much of the world as possible, because then they're less, first of all, they're more likely to be immune healthy and they're less likely to have allergies. So it's, I mean, it really, I think this, frankly, it's not a liberal or a conservative thing to say. It's actually conservative to say that we should keep in touch with our roots, at least our evolutionary roots. And so going to another planet or living on a space station is not necessarily a good thing. I mean, people already know the twin study has been done.
Yep.
That the person who went into space came back down with a lot more problems than the one who stayed on the ground.
All right. I think we have about 8 minutes left. So let's speculate about disclosure. Now, one could argue it's already happened. You just have to seek out the evidence and look at the data. And in my opinion, it's pretty overwhelming. Now, there's a lot of data that's out there that's, deliberately misinformation, things like that. But there's enough of it to conclude that it's something.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to kind of probability weight, and you don't even have to put a number on it, what do you think these entities, beings, whatever you want to call them, are?
I mean, the best way I can speculate what they are is to fast forward humanity 1,000 years and say, what would we be if we went somewhere else? We're unlikely to be what you and I are talking to right now, each other, right? I mean, assuming we don't let AI destroy us, or we don't, have our own Butlerian jihad a la, Dune, we will have AI that will have transcended us. And so either we're using it or it's using us. And so when we go anywhere else, it will be, at the very least, our, in the best of sense of the words, our companion. So I think that that's the best way that I can speculate what might be here, is that it's not what got on the ship when it was launched from somewhere else. It's what got planted here by the von Neumann probe-like process that we're dealing with. And, you can send an egg much further than you can send a person. If you can reconstruct an egg from a basic plan, you don't even have to send the egg. You can just reconstruct it on site. And so that's, I think, one way to think about what's here. People often ask, is there something here? I think the question is different. The question should be, can something be here? Because if you can't imagine something being here, having gotten here from somewhere else, then you're never going to imagine that it's actually here, right? So, sorry. And so you can run the numbers. Even if you were to travel at just simple 10,000 miles an hour by rocket, it would only take you 5 billion years to get across the whole galaxy. Now, only 5 billion years, but that time has already happened. We don't have to worry about will it happen. It has already happened. So, we could start today. And I was actually working with Avi Loeb on a project to create the first of the human von Neumann probes. We could fast forward 5 billion years, and we could be everywhere just at simple rocket speeds. I mean, and we're within reach of being able to have the AI that would do everything that I just talked about, right? Speed that up, 100-fold, and you take 5 billion years, and now you're 50 million years everywhere. Speed it up a little more, and if you could go as fast as light speed, the galaxy is only 100,000 light years across. In a couple of 100,000 years, you're everywhere. So can you be here is answered. The short answer is yes. Now, you ask anybody, who, will think of for a moment, what's the likelihood that there's something else out there? Everybody says 201 that I speak to, and these are not like people who are in the area. They say, of course, why not? It would be arrogant to think we're the only ones. Okay. So you put together, can you be here, with the likelihood that there already is something else that's out there. And suddenly the probability that something is here jumps enormously. People are always and this is one of the things that disappoints me about SETI, is that they're so worried about something out there, and it's such a safe bet to worry about something that's 50 light years away, because you can never really be proven wrong, right? And so it's such a weak bet. How about the signal, the wow signal, that might already be in the sky today, right? Why not spend time on that? And why is it allowed to have a publicly funded thing that focuses you, 100 light years away, but you won't put a penny towards something that's local, or the ones that you do put the penny towards, Arrow and others, spend all their time spewing out disinformation and incredibly faulty reports that if, even a high school teacher would give you an F on.
Yeah, I mean, Arrow, look, in my opinion, Arrow is quite obviously a counterintelligence operation. The whole point, if you looked at people who testified to them, they always require you to sign an NDA.
Yeah.
Why? Right? It's like a honeypot. So in my opinion.
And they promised to give those people back the transcripts, and they never did. So, I mean, the integrity is lost. And I would say to Senator Gillibrand and others who supported Arrow, you're supporting a group that is lying to the people that are coming in to testify. So the people who did testify have no faith in the process. And the rest who, like you and I, think that this is just a honeypot, have basically gone around them. So the purpose of the group is moot at this point. Discontinue it. Shut the place down. It's not necessary.
Yeah, 100%. Agree 100%. The other thing that I wanted to mention too is since Earth has been around, there have been at least 6 major documented extinction events. And the species that survive tend to be burrowing species. Mm-hmm. How much stake do you put in this crypto-terrestrial hypothesis?
Yeah, no, it's funny you say that. That's one of the things that I've often wondered is that, burrowing things and things that go underground go to ground because they know that it's going to take 1,000 years until stuff gets better. And there's plenty of room underground. You could have multiple layers of civilization underground. And I often wonder why we don't do it.
Well, we kind of do.
We're starting
Cheyenne Mountain, Denver Airport. Yeah, there's plenty of.
Well, I mean, if we go to Mars, we're going to have to do it.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, they just found a cave on the moon, and they say this is a great place to go. Set up a base. Once you've learned to do it, and you're perfectly happy, and you've adapted yourself to such an environment, why would you bother coming up to the dirty planet with the prehistoric monsters, or whatever? Why not just leave it, as a garden? And so,
where you study the flora and fauna above, right?
Yeah. I mean, Jacques Vallée and I wrote a paper for SETI, for a SETI conference that got accepted, but then I decided not to go because they wouldn't let Jacques go because it was just ridiculous. It was like, I was like, I'm not going to allow that. And what we said was it shouldn't be a search for material consciousness. It should be a search for consciousness itself, and pointed out that consciousness doesn't need to reside on a planet. Once you've gotten to a certain level of achievement, you could be in the intergalactic space in the middle of nowhere and, extracting energy from, the 0-point field or whatever, and doing whatever it is that you need to do and whatever you want to contemplate. And you don't have to be on a planet. The Hollywood notion of what an alien is so human-centric and so barbarian focused, as if they care to absorb the surface of the planet. There's so many other places that you could exist that if you have the technology, it just doesn't matter. So, I'm perfectly, whether they are crypto-terrestrial that arose here or whether they arrived here so long ago that it doesn't matter what you name them, that they're essentially the same thing. I think what you're left with is the possibility that the planet doesn't really belong to us alone, at least.
All right, Dr. Nolan, any final words? I think we're well over time, so I appreciate your kindness.
No, it's okay. I've chattered enough. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and the audience is gonna love this interview, I'm confident. So Thank you very much, Dr. Nolan.
Thank you very much.
If you enjoyed today's video, please hit like and subscribe, and also hit the notification button so you can be notified whenever I post new content. Thank you. Now, if you're enjoying the channel and you want to support it, there are several things you can do. In fact, there are 5 things you can do. The first thing you can do is just buy my books. I got plenty of books out in the market right now, and I would prefer that folks buy a book rather than giving me direct support, because they get something out of it. They get a real tangible product. The second way you can support me is by becoming a member on YouTube or becoming a patron on Patreon. And just go to either site and it'll explain everything. The third way you can support the channel is by checking out my merch site, which is here. There's plenty of stuff that you can get to support the channel. And I'd appreciate that you have it and can wear it. Not only do you help support the channel, but you also help promote the channel, and I appreciate that. The fourth way that you can support the channel, and this is really easy, is anytime you want to buy something on Amazon, literally just go to the description below and click on any link, literally any link. The channel gets a cut of that, and it costs you no extra money. You just go through the link, as I'm part of the Amazon Affiliates Club. The fifth and final way you can support the channel is through donations. Now, I don't prefer these because it's more of an expression of gratitude, but you don't really get anything out of it as a subscriber to the channel. However, if you decide to do these options, there's 2 options. There's Buy Me a Coffee, which is a separate site, and there's also, you can go through YouTube with either a super chat, super sticker, or a super thanks. Again, I prefer Buy Me a Coffee because that organization takes less money than Amazon does. But either way, I appreciate any support you are willing to give the channel. So thank you very much, and keep watching. I really appreciate it.